So we've been brewing a lot of New England IPAs lately.
A ton of New England IPAs.
Yeah, it's kind of one of our favorite styles of beer, I guess.
And there's been a few things that we've kind of noted going through brewing and kegging the New England IPAs, and a few tips and tricks that we want to hit. What makes the New England IPA so much different? So you got
Then what?
everything else.
Okay.
Just real basic, like haziness, flavor,
Mouthfeel.
Mouthfeel is milky. You got tons of like hop additions, heavy hop additions in it in general.
But low IBU.
Low IBUs. The green bills typically for New England IPAs are specific also, and it's really the grain part of what gets you that mouthfeel in the beer. And that's why we have oats and wheat up here. These are two main components that we like to use. I think, Eric, you like to use wheat more heavy.
I've been using wheat more heavy, but I have done both. I mean, you can use oats and wheat, or vice versa, it doesn't matter. You know, like I think you get the same kind of result. I haven't really been able to tell a difference.
Right.
If wheat is better than oats yet, I think I need to still brew more.
So the green bill typically is a base grain like 2-row. We've experimented with Pilsner malt as the base, just to throw something kind of crazy in there. And
I mean, with Pilsner malt, you do get a different taste.
You do.
It's a lot lighter, and I think you get a lot lighter of a color as well.
Yeah, I remember that beer that you brewed with the Pilsner malt, and it was like milky white looking.
Yeah, it was different.
It was very
different. It still
different.
tasted really good.
It
still
did.
tasted all right.
So typically you'll have the base malt. Sometimes you can do some light, other kind of lighter style of grain bill. I know sometimes you've added Crystal 40.
Crystal 20.
Crystal 20, just a little bit.
Yeah.
And I've played around with honey malt a little bit also, and it adds just a little bit of color and a little bit of residual sweetness in the beer also.
I think going back to the wheat and the oats does help with head retention a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
That gives it that fluffy white head. So that has, I mean, since we've been adding like, you know, probably a 70-30, like maybe 80-20, like just based off of like just wheat and oats, the head retention has been a whole lot better.
Right.
Like, that's different than like maybe a normal IPA recipe or, you know, something. Like we're at New England, that's kind of a thing. You want good head retention.
Yeah, and it's all the protein, and I think they call it lipids that are contained in both the oats and the wheat and that type of grain or flaked grain or whatnot, adjunct maybe. It's those things that make the mouthfeel soft, or part of it that makes the mouthfeel soft, like a stout, but end up being hazy also like an IPA.
So that's sort of what we do for our grain bill, at least. Now the yeast we use is Imperial Juice yeast. We have gravitated towards that as our favorite yeast and just in style.
Actually, just in general, like any brew day that we do, our kind of like go-to yeast has always been so far Imperial yeast.
Yeah.
Mostly because of the cell count, but you can just pitch it typically.
Yeah, pretty much. Right out of the package, as long as it's pretty fresh. I mean, like, and even if it isn't, like it's like maybe a month or two out, it still does a really good job.
Yeah.
And it still finishes out fast, and that's why I like Imperial yeast. Not trying to plug them or anything, but you know, we can.
We can plug them.
But no, I think Imperial yeast just flies through, like, you know, fermentation.
So for Imperial yeast, we use Juice, which is the yeast that they have. If you're looking for a Y yeast version, they have a London 3, which people also use for New England's, and then White Labs has WLP 006, which I think is also similar to the London yeast and the Juice yeast. So these types of yeast help aid in the act of like biotransformation. The yeast will actually metabolize the oils from the hops when you're dry hopping and actually create a whole new kind of aroma and flavor compound. That's kind of the next thing that we want to get into, is the hop and the hop schedules for a New England IPA.
Yeah, so typically a New England IPA has a low IBU. So you're not gonna have a lot of boil hops. You're not gonna have a lot of hops really in the, you know,
in the boil at all.
You're gonna have a lot in your whirlpool. That tends to be like one big thing that everybody does is a lot of whirlpool hops.
Yep.
And then you're gonna have a lot of dry hop. Now,
and typically when we do IPAs, I think we do shoot for like a 10 to 30 IBU. We'll do like one almost like a flavoring addition. Anywhere, it could be from 0 to 30 or so. And it's typically like an ounce of whatever hop that we're using elsewhere in the recipe.
Yeah, we've, I mean, if you're doing, you can do like a long boil. Like I know I've done in New England and I've done like 60-minute boils, and you can do like a 1/4 ounce, like at the beginning, and still get that like, 30 or 20 IBUs or whatever it is, depending on what kind of hop it is.
Yeah, just depending on the alpha acid of the hop.
Yeah.
So I typically dry hop
2 days.
About 2 days after I pitch the yeast, and that's going to get you all of that biotransformation hop that we were talking about, or aroma and flavor that we were talking about from the yeast. And then I'll also do about 2 days before I keg it. Even if it sits fermenting for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, just 2 or 3 days before I keg it, and that'll kind of give it that like fresh little bit of punch on the aroma side. Otherwise, I feel like if it sits and you don't do that second dry hop, the aroma kind of fades away from the fermenter a little bit or something.
That's the same thing I do. So like at the end, I feel like 2 days is just enough.
Yeah.
Like 1 day is fine, but I don't feel like you get like those flavors that are there. With 2 days, I think you still do, and you get a lot of still aromatics from that. But anything, if it sits like 6 days till the end of fermentation, you don't get as much aromatics from the hops. You get the flavor, but it's just not as...
For whatever reason,
yeah,
it's just real good to do it right before you keg.
Yeah.
That's what we found at least.
You can add as much hops as you want to a 5-gallon batch, but you're only gonna get so much back. So I don't know if there is, I mean, like, I'm not sure what the threshold would be to dry hopping. I mean, I kind of tend to stick below 5 ounces in any dry hop addition I do. I don't go anything above that.
Now, is that like total dry hop?
No, that's
just
one dry hop
okay.
addition. So like I'll typically go with 3 ounces at like biotransformation, and I'll go with 3 ounces at the end.
Yeah.
And that gives me, that's 6 ounces altogether. Right. So that's not including what I add in the whirlpool, which is typically about 4 to 3 ounces. So that's 10 ounces of hops right there.
Right. I'm a little bit heavier. I lean towards about the 3 to maybe even 4 ounce range for each of the dry hops.
Okay.
I'm probably more in like the 1.5 to almost 2 ounces per gallon of dry hop. And I can't say that I have noticed that mine have been more hop aroma-esque or flavorful than yours have been either.
But we're only talking about like 1 ounce difference too. Yeah. So I mean, like, it's kind of hard to tell with that.
I guess the moral of the story is if you only got 3 hops, but your recipe calls for 4, and a dry hop, just
you're fine.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
But I think the point we're trying to get across is don't go way overboard with the hops.
Yeah.
And like, think about, you only need so much and you're not gonna get it all back.
Right. There's stories online I've seen on forums and stuff about the New England style IPA, and they say, well, this head brewer puts in this many pounds of hops per barrel and this brewer does it. Everyone's gonna do it differently. But we've found pretty good results, not really using a whole lot, but just doing it at the right times.
Yes. And I think that's key, is doing it at the right times.
Yeah.
And making sure you know where your beer's at. So like you know where your beer's gonna finish at. And I think that last 2 days, at least for me, for that to get those aromatics, I want to know where the beer's at, and I'm gonna be like, okay, well, it's gonna finish out on Wednesday. I need a dry hop on Monday.
Right.
So, yes.
So that's hops, that's yeast, that's recipe. The only last thing that we really have not touched on has been the water and how you want to set your water profile for the New England style. We have just kind of been doing it across the board, almost the same target numbers, or basically you want to shoot for a higher chloride to sulfate ratio. I think, Eric, you actually shoot more for balanced, actually.
I've been going towards balanced.
I've been shooting for a 2-to-1 chloride to sulfate ratio, and I think this is actually kind of telling because you brought over a New England IPA last night, and it was phenomenal. It was really good, and I want to say you used a balanced profile on that. And I also want to say that you can get into all of the chloride and sulfate stuff and the water profile stuff, but I wouldn't stress about it too much. It may help, but even between being a 2-to-1 and a balanced, which would be a 1-to-1, I can't really tell.
There's subtle differences. It's not enough where if you haven't brewed this a lot, you're not going to notice it.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know if one's better than the other, and I can't say it is.
Yeah.
And we haven't brewed enough of them. Hell, we've probably brewed 20 damn New England IPAs so far in the past, 6 months.
We've brewed so many.
So, I mean, like, we're still figuring the water profile stuff out. Yeah. There's tons of articles online that say, hey, you have to be within this number, and this number.
Talk about pH and all the other additions and stuff.
I think you kind of just have to do your own thing. Yeah. Like, you kind of have to try to go with one thing and then like kind of tweak it as you go.
And you can't even really start on water profile stuff until you know your water test report, what your numbers are initially, or you're starting out and going to the store and getting distilled water like we do and just put zeros on all those and start from scratch and add what you want. So the only other thing that we just noticed, and I read online, about kegging a New England IPA, and even when you bottle it and can it, or when you buy one in a can, you notice sometimes the label will tell you to roll it. And one thing we've both noticed is that after a New England IPA sits in the keg for 3-4 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, about a month and a half.
Yeah, probably.
You'll notice that the beer will actually start to clear up, and you'll also notice that the mouthfeel will change, I want to say. That's what we noticed. And then also your hop aroma and profile will change as it seems like a lot of that haziness starts to settle down in the bottom of the keg and the dip tube no longer picks it up.
Well, it's technically sitting in a cold refrigerator, so...
Yeah, I mean, it's basically cold crashing itself.
Exactly. So everything's falling out of suspension. Yep. So what we just tried is to roll, you
just shake the keg a little bit. And what it does is it will disturb the bottom, and it actually changed the way the beer was perceived between when we just poured it and before we shook it and after we shook it. The sample after we shook it also clogged the keg because we probably shook it too much. Also, good thing to note. Yeah. But it had more of that milkier, kind of fuller mouthfeel, like slick or pillowy or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And the aroma was better and the flavor was better.
Yep, because all the hops were back in it, basically, from the bottom.
The hops and all of the protein that was in suspension that helps aid with the mouthfeel and all that stuff. So that's a big one that we just figured out recently. Is probably every 2 or 3 weeks, kind of just give your keg a little bit of a stir. I don't know about rolling it or lifting it out and rolling it or anything. Just kind of stir it a little bit.
Probably stir it up and let it sit, because if you're gonna try to pour that thing, it's gonna be all foam more than likely.
I'd say 2 to 3 weeks, or whenever you start noticing it's starting to lose its haziness a little bit.
Maybe getting a little bit of not so soft mouthfeel, but maybe like a little bit of watery.
Crispery almost.
Yeah,
a little more crisp.
Yeah.
So, there's one more thing. I'm just gonna throw it out there. We did talk about adding some different kinds of grain to the grain bill. Usually you keep it like 2-row or Pilsner malt just to the base grain, adding your adjuncts to it, getting that hazy, milky mouthfeel. I also started to experiment with adding a little bit of carafoam to it because I was noticing the beer was getting almost fermenting out a little bit too much. So adding the carafoam leaves a little bit of those residual sugars, just a little bit, to keep the beer kind of sweet and a little bit higher mouthfeel overall also. Just something that I've been playing around with now, and I did it with one batch and it came out probably one of my best batches I've done so far.
All right, so this is Eric and Eric. This is our tips and tricks, our way we've been doing things. I'm sure maybe in a month or so, we're gonna change some of this stuff up, but that's a good baseline for some of you who may be looking at this video and being like, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing.
Or I want to brew my first New England
Yeah.
IPA. What do I need to attack?
So let us know in the comment section below if you guys have any questions, comments, what other things you do differently than we do. Make sure to like this video, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.
I don't have anything. Cheers. Man, we suck at the cheers part now.
Yeah.
See you guys next time.
Cheers, guys.